The thunderous crack of a pistol shot echoed through the dusty valley as Wade Anderson spurred his horse forward, away from the chaos of the botched bank robbery behind him. It was 1875 in the rugged terrain of the Arizona Territory, and he'd never intended to get mixed up with the Hollister Gang. Now, with a bullet graze on his arm and a posse likely forming, he needed distance between himself and the town of Copper Springs. The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Wade guided his chestnut mare, Penny, through a narrow canyon. He wasn't an outlaw, at least. He hadn't been until today, when circumstance and poor judgment landed him as an unwitting lookout for three men he barely knew. The job had gone sideways fast, leaving two dead and Wade running for his life. After several miles of hard riding, Wade slowed Penny to a walk. The horse's flanks heaved with exertion, and he patted her neck apologetically. "Just a bit farther, girl," he murmured. "We'll find water soon." The canyon opened to a small valley, and Wade's eyes caught movement in the distant smoke rising from what appeared to be the remains of a homestead. Caution told him to avoid it, but the possibility of water drew him closer. As he approached, the devastation became clearer. The modest cabin was a charred skeleton, still smoldering in places. The small barn hadn't fared much better. Wade dismounted, hand resting on his revolver as he surveyed the scene. "Hello," he called out, not expecting an answer. A weak cough from behind the remains of a wagon made him draw his gun. Wade approached slowly, boots crunching on the ash-covered ground. What he found wasn't a threat, but a young woman, her face streaked with soot and dried blood, dress torn and singed. She was huddled against the wagon wheel, clutching a small bundle to her chest. Her eyes, bright blue and filled with fear, locked onto his. Wade holstered his weapon and crouched down. "Madam, you hurt." She stared at him blankly, then slowly shook her head. The bundle in her arms, a blanket wrapped around a few small possessions, trembled in her grasp. Did they send you back to finish the job?" Her voice was barely a whisper, raspy from smoke. "Nobody sent me, madam. I was just passing through." Wade glanced around at the destruction. "Raiders." She nodded weakly. "Took everything, killed my husband, my pa, burned it all." Wade removed his hat, revealing sandy brown hair damp with sweat. "I'm sorry." The words felt inadequate against such loss. The woman closed her eyes, a tear cutting a clean path through the soot on her cheek. "I've got nothing left," she whispered. "Nothing?" Wade looked at her, really looked at her. Beyond the dirt and blood, she was young, probably early 20s. Her auburn hair was tangled and singed at the edges. She had the calloused hands of someone who worked hard, and despite the devastation surrounding her, there was something in the set of her jaw that spoke of strength. "You still got breath," Wade said quietly. "That's a start." Her eyes opened, focusing on him with sudden clarity. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Means you're alive, means there's still a chance for something else." Wade stood, offering his hand. "I'm Wade Anderson." She stared at his hand for a long moment before taking it. Willow O'Brien." Wade helped her to her feet. She swayed slightly but steadied herself against the wagon. "When did this happen?" he asked. "Yesterday." Her voice was slightly stronger now. "I've been hiding, waiting." "For what?" Willow looked around at the ruins of her life. "I don't know." Wade nodded toward Penny. "My horse can carry us both to the next town. You can't stay here." "I can't leave," she protested. "My husband and father, there." She gestured vaguely toward two mounds of freshly turned earth near what was once a garden. "You buried them yourself?" Wade asked softly. Willow nodded, chin trembling. "It took all night. The raiders thought I was dead too. I played dead when they—" Her voice broke. Wade stood awkwardly, aware that comfort wasn't his strong suit. "We should get you to a doctor." "No." Willow's voice was surprisingly firm. "First, I need water. Then I need to gather whatever the raiders didn't take." Wade nodded, respecting her practicality. "There's a creek nearby, behind what's left of the barn." While Willow searched through the rubble of her home, Wade filled his canteen and watered Penny. The brutal reality of frontier life wasn't new to him. He'd seen his share of violence in his 30 years, but there was something particularly cruel about this destruction. This hadn't been a random attack. The thoroughness suggested something personal. When he returned, Willow had collected a small pile of salvaged items, a slightly scorched shawl, a dented cooking pot, a few utensils, and a small wooden box. "This is all that's left," she said flatly. Wade helped her wrap everything in the shawl. "We should go before dark." "Where?" she asked, and the simple question carried the weight of her uncertainty. "Clearwater's the nearest town, about 15 miles east. We won't make it before nightfall, but we can get a fair distance." Willow looked back at the graves. "I should say goodbye properly." Wade nodded and stepped away, giving her privacy. He watched as she knelt between the mounds, her hands pressed against the earth, her lips moving in silent words. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs, but when she rose and turned back to him, her face was composed, determined. "I'm ready," she said. Wade helped her onto Penny, then mounted behind her. The mare protested slightly at the double burden but settled as Wade guided her east. Willow sat stiffly before him, careful not to lean back against his chest even as exhaustion clearly pulled at her. "You can rest," Wade said after they'd ridden in silence for nearly an hour. "I won't let you fall." "I don't even know you," she responded, but her voice lacked conviction. "No, you don't." Wade adjusted his hat against the setting sun. "But right now I'm all you've got." The bluntness of his statement seemed to reach her. Slowly, Willow allowed herself to relax, her back eventually resting against him as the rhythmic motion of the horse lulled her into an exhausted sleep. As darkness fell, Wade found a sheltered spot near a small stream to make camp. Willow stirred when he brought Penny to a stop. "Where are we?" she asked, disoriented. "Safe enough for tonight." Wade dismounted and helped her down. Her legs buckled slightly and he caught her by the elbows, steadying her. "When did you last eat?" Willow shook her head. "I don't remember." Wade set about making a small fire while Willow huddled nearby, watching his movements with wary attention. From his saddlebags, he produced jerky and hardtack along with coffee. It wasn't much, but it would sustain them. As they ate in silence, Wade occasionally glanced at his companion. In the firelight, he could see her more clearly. Her face, though smudged with dirt and marked by grief, had a delicate structure, high cheekbones, and a determined chin. Her hands trembled slightly as she sipped from the tin cup he'd given her. "How long were you married?" Wade finally asked, breaking the silence. 2 years. Willow stared into the fire. "Thomas was a good man, worked hard. We came west from Missouri after the war. My father joined us last spring." She took a shuddering breath. "We were making it work. The land was starting to yield. We had plans." Wade nodded, not pressing for more. He understood loss, had experienced enough of it himself. "The raiders," he said after a while. "You recognize any of them?" Willow's gaze snapped up to meet his. "Why?" Just wondering if this was random or targeted. She looked away. "There were 5 of them, the leader." She swallowed hard. "He knew Thomas by name, called him O'Brien before he—" Her voice faltered. Wade frowned. "Your husband have enemies?" "Thomas, no, he kept to himself, worked our land." Willow set down her cup. "But there was a man in Clearwater who wanted our property. Blackburn, Walter Blackburn, said our creek would be perfect for his cattle operation. And your husband wouldn't sell. It wasn't just about the money. That land was our future, our dream." Willow's voice hardened. "Thomas told Blackburn he'd die before giving it up, and now—" Wade absorbed this information silently. It wasn't his fight, but the injustice of it stirred something in him, something he'd tried to bury beneath years of drifting and avoiding attachments. "You should sleep," he said finally. "We'll reach Clearwater by midday tomorrow." Willow nodded, wrapping the salvaged shawl around her shoulders. "Why are you helping me, Mr. Anderson?" The question caught him off guard. Wade poked at the fire, watching sparks rise into the night sky. Seemed like the right thing to do. "Most men would have ridden on by." Wade met her gaze. "I'm not most men." Willow studied him for a moment, then lay down near the fire, using her small bundle as a pillow. "No," she murmured, already drifting toward sleep. "I don't suppose you are." Wade stayed awake long after her breathing had evened out, pondering the turn his life had taken in the span of a day. He'd gone from reluctant criminal to reluctant rescuer. Neither role sat comfortably on his shoulders, but of the two, he preferred the latter. Morning came with a pale golden light spreading across the landscape. Wade had dozed off just before dawn but woke instantly when Willow stirred. She sat up, disoriented for a moment before memory flooded back, bringing with it the weight of grief that Wade could see settle over her like a physical burden. "Morning," he said, rekindling the fire for coffee. Willow nodded in acknowledgement, then walked to the stream to wash her face. When she returned, she looked marginally better, the worst of the soot and dirt gone, her auburn hair pulled back with a strip of fabric. The cut on her forehead was visible now, a nasty gash that had scabbed over. "That needs looking at when we get to town," Wade said, nodding toward the wound. "I've had worse." Willow accepted the coffee he offered. "Mr. Anderson, Wade, thank you for stopping yesterday, for not riding past." Wade shrugged uncomfortably. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said with certainty. "They wouldn't have." After a pause, she added, "What takes you to Clearwater?" It was a natural question, but Wade hesitated. The truth that he was running from a botched robbery wasn't something he was eager to share. "Just passing through. I don't stay in one place too long." "A drifter, then." Something like that. Wade busied himself packing up their meager camp. "We should get moving if we want to reach town by midday." They rode in companionable silence for most of the morning, the landscape gradually changing from rocky terrain to more gentle hills as they approached Clearwater. Wade could feel Willow tensing as they drew closer to town. "What will you do when we get there?" he asked. "I have an aunt in St. Louis," Willow said after a moment. "I could try to reach her, but—" She sighed. "I have no money for the journey. I'll need to find work first." "And Blackburn." Willow's hands tightened on the edge of her shawl. "What about him? You think he's behind the attack on your home?" "I know he is," she said with quiet conviction. "But what can I do? It's my word against his, and he's a powerful man in Clearwater." Wade said nothing more on the subject, but his mind was working through possibilities as they approached the outskirts of town. Clearwater was larger than he'd expected, a bustling settlement that had clearly benefited from the cattle trade. The main street was lined with businesses: a general store, hotel, several saloons, and a bank. People moved about their business, paying little attention to the newcomers. Wade guided Penny toward a modest building with a sign identifying it as Dr. Howard's office. "First things first," he said, dismounting and helping Willow down. The doctor, a balding man with spectacles and a kindly face, looked up from his desk as they entered. His expression shifted quickly from professional interest to concern when he saw Willow's condition. "My word, what happened to you, miss?" he asked, rising to guide her to an examination chair. Willow glanced at Wade before answering. "Raiders," she said simply. "They burned our homestead." "The O'Brien place," Dr. Howard frowned. "I heard there was trouble out that way, but—" He shook his head. "I'm terribly sorry, Mrs. O'Brien. Your husband and father-in-law, dead," Willow said, her voice tight. "I buried them." The doctor's face softened with sympathy as he gently examined the cut on her forehead. "This will heal clean, but I'd like to put a proper dressing on it." "Any other injuries?" Willow shook her head, then winced slightly. "Just bruises." While the doctor tended to Willow, Wade excused himself, promising to return shortly. He needed to get the lay of the land, understand what kind of town Clearwater was, and more importantly, who Walter Blackburn was. His first stop was the livery, where he arranged for Penny to be fed and watered. The stable hand, a talkative young man named Caleb, proved to be an excellent source of information. "Blackburn? Sure, everyone knows him," Caleb said, pitching fresh hay into Penny's stall. "Owns the biggest spread north of town, the Box B Ranch. Been buying up all the small homesteads along Clearwater Creek. Seems to be doing well for himself," Wade observed casually. "Oh, he is that." Caleb lowered his voice. "Some say not all his business dealings are exactly honest-like, but nobody crosses him. He's got the mayor and sheriff in his pocket, and a bunch of hard cases working for him." "Any of them been in town recently?" Caleb scratched his chin. "Come to think of it, Blackburn's foreman, Holt, and some of his boys rode in yesterday. They were celebrating something at the Silver Dollar, spending big." Wade thanked the young man with a coin and continued his reconnaissance. The Silver Dollar Saloon stood at the far end of the main street, its facade freshly painted, a contrast to the more weathered buildings surrounding it. Wade didn't enter not yet, but made note of its location. Next, he found the town's only hotel, a 3-story building with a wrap-around porch. The clerk at the desk was reluctant to offer information until Wade slid a silver dollar across the counter. "Mr. Blackburn?" "Oh yes, very important man in Clearwater," the clerk said, pocketing the coin. "Doesn't stay in town much, prefers his ranch house, but he owns this hotel, actually. And the bank across the street." "Owns the town, sounds like," the clerk shrugged. "Makes things run smooth. Before Mr. Blackburn came, Clearwater was just another dusty stop on the trail. Now we've got a proper town." Wade made his final stop at the general store, where he purchased a new dress for Willow, along with some basic necessities. The storekeeper's wife helped him select appropriate items, her curiosity evident but thankfully restrained to knowing glances rather than questions. By the time Wade returned to the doctor's office, Willow was looking considerably better. The wound on her forehead had been properly cleaned and dressed, and she'd washed more thoroughly, though her ruined dress remained a stark reminder of her ordeal. "I got you some things," Wade said awkwardly, handing her the package from the store. "Figured you'd want to change." Willow accepted the bundle, surprise and gratitude mingling on her face. "You didn't have to do that. Doctor, is there somewhere she could?" "Of course, doctor." Howard gestured to a door at the back of his office. "My wife's sitting room. She's out visiting patients, but she wouldn't mind." When Willow disappeared to change, the doctor turned to Wade. "She's been through a terrible shock. Physically, she'll heal, but the trauma—" "It's not something to be taken lightly," Wade nodded. "I understand." "Do you have family here in town?" the doctor asked. "No, we just arrived. I was helping her reach Clearwater safely." Dr. Howard studied him. "I see. Well, Mrs. O'Brien will need somewhere safe to stay while she recovers. I'd offer our spare room, but my wife's sister is visiting from back east." "I'll take care of it," Wade assured him, though he wasn't entirely sure how. When Willow emerged, Wade had to work to keep his expression neutral. The simple blue calico dress transformed her, or perhaps it was just seeing her free from the stained and torn clothing that had been a visible reminder of her trauma. Her auburn hair was neatly combed and tied back with a ribbon that had come with the dress. Despite the bandage on her forehead, she looked almost like any young woman in town. "Thank you," she said to Wade, genuine gratitude in her eyes, "for everything." Dr. Howard cleared his throat. "I've told Mr. Anderson that you should take it easy for a few days. Grief and shock take a toll on the body as well as the spirit." Willow's expression clouded. "I appreciate your concern, doctor, but I can't afford to rest. I need to find work." "First," Wade interjected, "you need a proper meal and a safe place to stay." He turned to the doctor. "What do we owe you?" Dr. Howard waved him off. "Nothing. Mrs. O'Brien's husband helped set my broken arm last winter when I took a fall out at their place. Thomas was a good man. This is the least I can do." The mention of her husband brought a fresh wave of grief to Willow's face, but she thanked the doctor with quiet dignity. As they stepped back into the bright sunlight of the main street, Wade noticed her scanning the surroundings with obvious tension. "You're worried about running into Blackburn," he observed. Willow nodded. "Or his men. I'd recognize them." Her hand trembled slightly as she adjusted her shawl. "I don't know what I'd do if I saw them. For now, let's focus on getting you settled." Wade guided her toward a small cafe he'd spotted during his walk. Food first. Over a simple meal of stew and bread, Wade watched Willow gradually relax. Color returned to her cheeks as she ate, reminding him that she'd been through physical as well as emotional trauma. "I need to tell you something," Wade said when they'd finished eating. "I'm not just a drifter passing through. Yesterday, before I found you, I was involved in something I'm not proud of." Willow set down her spoon, wariness returning to her eyes. "What do you mean?" Wade kept his voice low. "I got mixed up with some men in Copper Springs, a bank robbery. I didn't know what they were planning until it was too late and things went bad. I ran." Willow stared at him, processing this revelation. "Are you wanted by the law?" "Probably, though I don't think anyone got a good look at me, but I can't stay in one place too long." Wade met her gaze directly. "I wanted you to know the truth. I'm not the good man you might think I am." After a long moment, Willow spoke. You stopped to help me when you had every reason to ride on. That counts for something. She studied him across the table. We all make mistakes, Wade. It's what we do after that matters. Her lack of judgment stunned him. Still, it complicates things. I can get you set up somewhere safe, but then I should move on. Willow nodded slowly, but disappointment flashed in her eyes. I understand. They finished their meal in silence, each lost in thought. As Wade paid, Willow suddenly stiffened, her gaze fixed on the window. What is it? He asked. Those men across the street, she whispered. The three by the hitching post, they were there, at our farm. Wade casually turned to look. Three hard-faced men stood in front of the silver dollar, smoking and laughing. They had the unmistakable look of hired guns, weathered, dangerous, and comfortable with violence. You sure? Willow nodded, her face pale. The tall one with the red bandana, he's the one who shot Thomas, called him by name before he did it. Wade felt a cold anger settling in his gut. Stay here, he said quietly. I'll be back. Wade, no. Willow grabbed his wrist. There are three of them and they're killers. What are you going to do? Just gathering information, he assured her, though his hand instinctively checked his revolver. I won't start anything. Willow didn't look convinced, but she released his wrist. Please be careful. I've already buried two men I cared about. The implication that she cared about him caught Wade off guard. He nodded once and stepped outside, crossing the street at an angle that wouldn't immediately draw the attention of the three men. He positioned himself at the corner of the general store, close enough to overhear their conversation while appearing to be simply rolling a cigarette. Told Blackburn it's done, the tall man with the red bandana was saying. O'Brien's land is clear for the taking, no witnesses, one of his companions laughed. Except that woman, you sure she was dead, Holt? The tall man, Holt, spat on the ground. Shot her myself, she ain't talking to nobody. Still, boss wants us to stay in town a few days, the third man said. Make sure there's no trouble before he files the claim on that property. Wade had heard enough. He abandoned the pretense of the cigarette and returned to the cafe, his mind racing. Willow was still at their table, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. You heard something, she said, reading his expression. Wade nodded, taking his seat. They think you're dead. Their boss, Blackburn, I assume, is planning to file a claim on your land. Willow's eyes flashed with anger. So he'll get away with it, murder my family, take our land, and just go on with his life. Not if we can help it, Wade said, surprising himself with the declaration. But first, we need to get you somewhere safe. Those men are staying in town, and if they spot you, they'll finish what they started, Willow finished grimly. But where can I go? I don't know anyone in Clearwater well enough to ask for shelter. Wade considered their options. The hotel was out of the question, given that Blackburn owned it. The local boarding house would be too public. They needed somewhere discreet. I might have an idea, he said finally, but you'll have to trust me. At the edge of town stood a small, somewhat dilapidated church. When Wade knocked on the door of the adjacent cottage, it was opened by a silver-haired man in a simple black suit, Reverend Miller, as he introduced himself. We need help, Reverend, Wade said directly. This is Mrs. O'Brien. Her husband and father were murdered by men working for Walter Blackburn. They burned her homestead, and now they're looking to finish the job. The Reverend's bushy eyebrows rose at Wade's blunt explanation, but he ushered them inside without hesitation. Sit down, my dear, he said to Willow. You look ready to collapse. Over cups of strong tea, Wade explained the situation in full, including his own questionable arrival in their lives, but omitting the specific details of his troubles in Copper Springs. The Reverend listened without interruption, his weathered face growing increasingly troubled. Blackburn's influence in this town has always concerned me, he said when Wade finished. But murder, this is beyond what even I suspected. He turned to Willow. Of course you can stay here, Mrs. O'Brien. I have a spare room that's plain but comfortable. I couldn't impose, Willow began. It's no imposition, it's what's right. The Reverend's voice was firm. And who would look for you in a preacher's home? With Willow's safety temporarily secured, Wade found himself at a crossroads. The sensible thing would be to leave Clearwater immediately. The posse from Copper Springs might be looking for him, and he'd already involved himself in a dangerous situation with Blackburn's men. Yet something kept him from simply riding away, something beyond mere concern for Willow's welfare. "What will you do now?" Willow asked when the Reverend had shown her to her room and left them alone for a moment. "I should move on," Wade admitted, "but I can't leave you to face this alone." Willow studied him. "Why, you've already done more than most would." Wade struggled to articulate the feeling growing within him. "I've spent years drifting, never staying anywhere long enough to care. Then yesterday I found myself mixed up in something that made me question who I've become." He met her gaze. "Helping you. It feels like a chance to set something right. Even if it means risking your own freedom, your life," Wade smiled faintly. "I've risked both for far less worthy causes." Willow reached out, her hand covering his. "Then we'll face this together." After a pause, she added, "But we need a plan. Going against Blackburn directly is suicide. First, we need evidence," Wade said. "Your word against his men won't be enough, not with his influence in town. The sheriff works for Blackburn, according to what I've heard." Willow's face fell. "Then what chance do we have?" "We need to find someone who can't be bought, someone with authority beyond Clearwater." Wade thought for a moment. "Is there a marshal or circuit judge who comes through town?" "Judge Harmon," the Reverend said, rejoining them. "He serves this whole territory, comes through every 2 months or so." "He's due in Clearwater next week, actually." Wade nodded. "Perfect. If we can gather enough evidence before then, present it directly to the judge." "But what evidence?" Willow asked. "It's my word against theirs." "Sometimes all you need is to catch someone in a lie," Wade said. "Those men think you're dead. That gives us an advantage they don't know we have." For the next several days, Wade carefully observed Blackburn's men from a distance, learning their routines while keeping his own profile low. He discovered that Holt, the foreman, spent most evenings at the Silver Dollar, often drinking heavily and talking freely. The other two Wade learned their names were Maddox, and Reese typically accompanied him. Meanwhile, Willow gradually regained her strength under Reverend Miller's care. The Reverend introduced her to his housekeeper, Mrs. Parker, as a recently widowed niece come to stay while she recovered from her loss. The simple story provided cover for Willow's presence without raising suspicions. Wade visited daily, ostensibly to attend prayer meetings but actually to share information and refine their plan. These quiet meetings in the Reverend's study became a respite from the tension of their situation, and Wade found himself looking forward to them more than he cared to admit. On the 4th evening, Wade arrived at the cottage with news. "Blackburn himself is coming to town tomorrow," he said as soon as Reverend Miller closed the study door. "Holt was boasting about it at the saloon. Apparently, Blackburn is bringing the paperwork to file a claim on your land." Willow's face hardened. "So soon? It's barely been a week since." She couldn't finish the sentence. "He's not wasting any time," Wade agreed, "but this gives us an opportunity. If we can get Blackburn and Holt together, maybe get them talking about what happened." "You mean trap them into a confession?" Willow asked. "How?" Wade hesitated. "I've been thinking about that. The most direct approach might be for you to confront them." "Me?" Willow's eyes widened. "They'd kill me on sight, not if it's in public with witnesses they can't control." Wade leaned forward. "And not if we have backup." "What kind of backup?" Reverend Miller asked skeptically. Wade smiled grimly. "As it happens, I made a friend at the telegraph office, sent a wire to the territorial marshal in Prescott explaining the situation, got a response today." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "Marshal Jenkins can't come himself, but he's sending a deputy. Should arrive on tomorrow morning's stage." Hope flickered in Willow's eyes for the first time since Wade had found her. A federal deputy would have authority over the local sheriff. "Exactly, and with Judge Harmon arriving next week, the timing couldn't be better." Wade turned to the Reverend. "We'll need your help too. You're respected in town, even by Blackburn. Your presence would add credibility." Reverend Miller nodded slowly. "Of course, but this plan puts Mrs. O'Brien at considerable risk." "I'll take that risk," Willow said firmly. "It's the only way to get justice for Thomas and my father." Wade admired her courage but felt a twist of anxiety at the thought of putting her in danger. Over the past days, his concern for her had deepened into something more complex, something he wasn't ready to name but couldn't deny. "There's something else," Wade said after a moment. "If this works, if we manage to expose Blackburn, what then? For you, I mean." Willow looked down at her hands. "I don't know, the farm is destroyed. Even with justice served, I'd be starting from nothing." "You could rebuild," Wade suggested. "The land is still yours." "Rebuild what? A life alone?" Willow shook her head. "I don't think I could bear to live there again, not with those memories." The Reverend cleared his throat. "Perhaps that's a decision for another day. For now, let's focus on the task at hand." They spent the evening refining their plan, considering all possible outcomes and risks. As the night grew late, Reverend Miller excused himself to bed, leaving Wade and Willow alone in the study. "Are you sure about this?" Wade asked when they were alone. "It's not too late to change your mind. You could take the stage east, start fresh somewhere else." "And let them get away with murder," Willow shook her head. "I couldn't live with myself." She studied him in the lamp light. "What about you? This isn't your fight. You could have been miles away by now." Wade considered the question. Why was he still here, risking everything for a woman he'd known barely a week? The answer came with surprising clarity. "Maybe I'm tired of running, tired of not standing for anything." Willow moved to sit beside him on the small sofa. "You're a good man, Wade Anderson. Despite what you might think of yourself. I've made a lot of mistakes. We all have." Willow's hand found his, her touch sending an unexpected warmth through him. "But you stopped to help a stranger who had nothing to offer in return. That says more about your character than any mistake." Wade looked down at their joined hands, then up to her face. The lamplight softened her features, bringing out the gold in her auburn hair. Despite the circumstances, despite the danger awaiting them tomorrow, he felt a moment of perfect clarity. Whatever happened next, meeting Willow O'Brien had changed something fundamental in him. "We should get some rest," he said reluctantly. "Tomorrow will be challenging." Willow nodded but didn't move away immediately. "Wade, thank you for everything." Before he could respond, she leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek, then rose quickly. "Good night," she said, and left the study, the scent of lavender soap lingering behind her. Wade sat alone for a long time, his hand touching the spot where her lips had been, wondering at the turn his life had taken and hoping desperately that their plan wouldn't lead to disaster. Morning arrived clear and bright, the kind of perfect day that seemed at odds with the tension gripping Wade as he waited at the stagecoach station. The coach was due at 10 o'clock, and Blackburn was expected to ride into town around noon. Everything hinged on timing, and the cooperation of a Deputy Marshal Wade had never met. The stagecoach arrived in a cloud of dust, right on schedule. Passengers disembarked: a traveling salesman, an elderly couple, a young man in a clerk's attire, but no one who looked like a lawman. Wade felt a spike of anxiety. Had the marshal's message been wrong? Had the deputy been delayed? Then a final passenger stepped down, a tall, broad-shouldered man in plain clothes, distinguished only by the subtle glint of a badge partially concealed beneath his jacket. He scanned the platform, his gaze settling on Wade with the practiced assessment of a lawman. Wade approached cautiously. "Deputy Marshal," the man nodded once. "James Cooper, you Anderson?" "Yes, sir." Deputy Cooper gestured away from the crowd. "Let's talk somewhere private." They found a quiet corner of the station, and Wade quickly outlined the situation and their plan. The deputy listened without interruption, his expression giving nothing away. "Bold plan," he said when Wade finished. "Risky? We don't have many options. Blackburn owns this town." Cooper nodded. "Marshal Jenkins briefed me, said this Blackburn character has been causing trouble throughout the territory. Land grabs, intimidation, but nothing we could pin on him directly." He studied Wade. "Until now, maybe, so you'll help us. That's why I'm here." Cooper checked his pocket watch. "Blackburn arrives at noon, you said." "That's what we heard. He'll likely go straight to the land office to file his claim." "Then that's where we'll be." The deputy adjusted his jacket, fully revealing the badge. "Let's get your witness ready." Willow was waiting at the Reverend's cottage, dressed in the blue calico dress Wade had purchased for her, her auburn hair neatly arranged. She looked calm, but Wade could see the tension in her shoulders, the tight grip of her hands in her lap. "Deputy Cooper, this is Willow O'Brien," Wade introduced them. "She's the sole survivor of the attack." Cooper tipped his hat respectfully. "Mrs. O'Brien, I understand you've been through a terrible ordeal." "Thank you for coming, Deputy," Willow said, rising to her feet. "I wasn't sure anyone would believe us. The marshal takes allegations of murder very seriously, madam." Cooper's voice was professionally neutral, but his eyes were kind. "Are you prepared for what might happen today?" Willow nodded. "I'm ready." Reverend Miller joined them, dressed in his Sunday best, Bible in hand. "I believe we all are," he said solemnly. Their plan was simple in concept but fraught with risks. Willow would confront Blackburn at the land office with the Reverend, Wade, and Deputy Cooper present as witnesses. The shock of seeing her alive might provoke Blackburn or Holt into revealing their guilt, especially if they believed she had evidence against them. The deputy would be there to make an immediate arrest if they incriminated themselves. As noon approached, they took their positions. Wade and Willow waited in a hardware store across from the land office, watching through the window. Deputy Cooper stationed himself inconspicuously near the land office door, posing as a customer examining notices posted on the wall. Reverend Miller waited inside, ostensibly discussing a church property matter with the clerk. Wade checked his pocket watch for the dozenth time. "It's almost noon." Willow nodded, her face pale but determined. "I see them." A group of riders approached down the main street, 4 men, with Walter Blackburn clearly in the lead. He was older than Wade had expected, perhaps in his 50s, with silver at his temples and an air of absolute authority. Beside him rode Holt, instantly recognizable by the red bandana around his neck. 2 other men, not Maddox or Reese, flanked them. "That's him," Willow whispered, her voice tight. "Blackburn?" Wade watched as the 4 men dismounted in front of the land office. "Remember, let him start the process before you confront him. We need him on record trying to claim your land." Willow took a deep breath. "I remember." They waited until all 4 men had entered the land office, then gave it another minute before crossing the street. Wade noticed that Willow's hands were steady, though her face was pale beneath her freckles. He felt a surge of admiration for her courage. "Ready?" he asked at the door. Willow nodded once. "Ready." They entered to find Blackburn at the clerk's desk, Holt beside him, the other 2 men standing near the door. Reverend Miller was positioned by the far wall, pretending to read a notice. Deputy Cooper remained by the window, his badge still visible but not prominently displayed. The clerk looked nervous, glancing between Blackburn and a stack of papers. "These documents appear to be in order, Mr. Blackburn," the clerk was saying. "Though I must say the timing is unusual. The O'Brien property is available for claim," Blackburn interrupted smoothly. "The previous owners are deceased with no heirs. As a neighboring landowner, I have priority right to file." "That's a lie," Willow said clearly, stepping forward. "The previous owner is very much alive." The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Blackburn spun around, his face registering shock before quickly composing itself. Holt actually stumbled backward, his hand moving instinctively toward his gun before stopping. "Mrs. O'Brien," Blackburn recovered first, his voice carefully controlled. "This is unexpected. We'd heard there was a tragedy at your homestead." "A tragedy you orchestrated," Willow said, her voice steady despite the slight tremor in her hands. "Your men burned my home and murdered my husband and father." Blackburn's eyes narrowed. "That's a serious accusation, madam. I'd advise caution before making such claims." "It's not an accusation, it's the truth." Willow stepped closer, her fear apparently forgotten in the face of her anger. "Your foreman, Mr. Holt there, called my husband by name before shooting him, said it was a message from you about our land." Holt's face had drained of color. "She's lying," he said quickly. "She wasn't even there. She was—" He stopped abruptly, realizing his mistake. "I was what, Mr. Holt?" Willow pressed. "Dead? Is that what you thought when you shot me and left me for dead?" The tension in the room was palpable. The clerk had shrunk back against the wall. Reverend Miller had moved closer, his presence a silent support for Willow. Wade positioned himself where he could watch both Blackburn and Holt, ready for any sudden moves. "I don't know what game you're playing," Blackburn said coldly, "but these wild accusations won't stand. Sheriff Davis is a personal friend of mine, and he'll be very interested in this matter," Deputy Cooper interjected, stepping forward and fully displaying his badge. "Deputy Marshal James Cooper, Territorial Authority. Mrs. O'Brien filed a formal complaint of murder and arson against you, Mr. Blackburn." Blackburn's confident demeanor faltered slightly. "This is a local matter, Deputy. You have no jurisdiction here." "Murder and land fraud are federal matters, especially in the territories," Cooper corrected. "And I have every jurisdiction." Holt, looking increasingly panicked, suddenly reached for his gun. "She should be dead," Wade moved instantly, tackling Holt before he could fully draw his weapon. They crashed into the clerk's desk, sending papers flying. Holt was strong, but Wade was fueled by a righteous anger that gave him an edge. He pinned the foreman to the floor, wrenching the gun from his hand. Meanwhile, Deputy Cooper had drawn his own weapon, training it on Blackburn and his remaining men. "Nobody move," the room froze. Wade kept Holt pinned, breathing hard from the exertion. Willow stood her ground, her gaze fixed on Blackburn with undisguised contempt. "You heard him," Cooper said, nodding toward Holt. "She should be dead. That sounds like an admission to me." "Holt is not speaking for me," Blackburn said tightly. "Whatever he's done, it wasn't under my orders." "That's not what you said, boss," Holt spat from the floor, his face twisted with rage and fear. "You said to clear that land by any means necessary, said the O'Briens were standing in the way of progress." "Shut your mouth," Blackburn hissed. But Holt, seeing the writing on the wall, was beyond caring. "You promised to protect us if anything went wrong, said you owned the sheriff, owned the judge." Deputy Cooper smiled grimly. "I think we've heard enough." He produced a pair of handcuffs. "Walter Blackburn, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, arson, and attempted land fraud. Your men will be charged as well." The next hour passed in a blur of activity. The local sheriff, summoned by the commotion, arrived to find his authority superseded by Cooper's federal jurisdiction. Additional deputies were dispatched to apprehend Maddox and Reese, who were found drinking at the Silver Dollar. A crowd gathered outside the land office, word of Blackburn's arrest spreading through town like wildfire. Through it all, Willow remained composed, answering Cooper's questions clearly and precisely, providing details that corroborated Holt's inadvertent confession. The Reverend stayed by her side, a steady, supportive presence. Wade watched her with growing admiration. The frightened, grief-stricken woman he'd found in the ashes of her home had transformed into someone formidable, still carrying her grief, but channeling it into a determination that commanded respect. As the afternoon waned, Deputy Cooper finally released them, explaining that Judge Harmon would hear the formal charges when he arrived next week. Until then, Blackburn and his men would be held in the territorial jail in the neighboring town of Liberty, away from any influence Blackburn might still have in Clearwater. "You did well, Mrs. O'Brien," Cooper said as they stood outside the land office. "Your testimony was crucial." "Thank you for believing me," Willow said simply. "Justice is rarely swift in these parts," Cooper warned. "But with the evidence we have, I'm confident Blackburn will face the consequences of his actions." As Cooper departed to arrange the prisoner's transfer, Reverend Miller suggested they return to his cottage. The day's events had drawn more attention to Willow than was comfortable, and curious townsfolk were already approaching with questions. Back at the Reverend's home, Willow finally allowed herself to react to the day's stress. Her hands shook as she sank into a chair, and when Wade brought her a glass of water, he noticed tears in her eyes. "It's over," he said gently, sitting beside her. "You did it." Willow shook her head. "Not over, just beginning." She looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thomas and my father are still gone, our home is still ashes. What do I do now, Wade?" Wade had been asking himself the same question. With Blackburn arrested and justice in motion, his reason for staying in Clearwater was technically complete, yet the thought of saying goodbye to Willow felt impossible. You rebuild, he said finally. Not necessarily your home if the memories are too painful, but your life. And you, Willow asked softly. Will you keep running? The question hung between them, loaded with unspoken meanings. Wade thought of the posse from Copper Springs, likely still searching for him. He thought of his years of drifting, never staying long enough to form attachments. And he thought of how, in just over a week, Willow O'Brien had somehow become more important to him than his own freedom. I don't want to run anymore, he admitted, but I'm still a wanted man in Copper Springs. Reverend Miller, who had been quietly making tea in the corner, cleared his throat. Perhaps there's a solution to that as well. He joined them at the table. Deputy Cooper seems a reasonable man. If you were to explain your situation, cooperate with the authorities in Copper Springs. Wade frowned. You think I should turn myself in? I think you should seek a path to redemption, not just escape, the Reverend said gently. From what you've told me, you were an unwitting participant in that robbery. No one was hurt by your actions. The Reverend's right, Willow said, her hand finding Wade's. You helped bring murderers to justice. That should count for something. Wade looked down at their joined hands, then up at Willow's face. Something was growing between them, something unexpected and precious. The thought of losing it before it had truly begun was unbearable. I'll speak to Cooper, he decided. Tomorrow, before he leaves for liberty. Willow's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. Thank you, she whispered. That evening, as they shared a simple meal with Reverend Miller, the conversation turned to practical matters. Willow's immediate future was secure. The Reverend had offered to let her stay until she decided her next steps, but the question of her homestead remained. The land is still legally yours, the Reverend pointed out. Once Blackburn's case is resolved, you'll need to decide whether to keep it or sell it, Willow nodded thoughtfully. I can't imagine living there again, but selling feels like betraying Thomas's dream. What was his dream exactly? Wade asked. Just the land itself or what it represented, Willow considered the question. A future, she said finally, security, a place to build something lasting, her voice softened, a family eventually. Then perhaps honoring his dream doesn't necessarily mean keeping that particular piece of land, the Reverend suggested. Perhaps it means finding your own path to that same future he wanted for you. The conversation continued into the evening, but Wade found his thoughts increasingly distracted. Tomorrow he would speak with Deputy Cooper, potentially changing the course of his life. He had no idea how the deputy would respond to his confession, but the risk suddenly seemed worth taking. Morning came with a gentle rain, unusual for the season but welcome in the dusty landscape. Wade rose early, determined to catch Deputy Cooper before he departed with his prisoners. He found the deputy at the jail, overseeing preparations for the transfer. Anderson, Cooper greeted him, didn't expect to see you this morning. Need to speak with you if you have a moment, Wade said. It's important. Cooper studied him briefly, then nodded. My office. In the small, cluttered space that served as the deputy's temporary headquarters, Wade laid out the truth of his situation. He explained the events in Copper Springs, his unwitting role in the robbery, and his flight that had ultimately led him to find Willow. Cooper listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When Wade finished, the deputy leaned back in his chair, considering. Most men in your situation wouldn't have stopped to help that woman, he observed. Would have kept riding, looking out for themselves. Wade shrugged. Couldn't leave her there. No, I suppose you couldn't. Cooper tapped his fingers on the desk. And now you're turning yourself in, essentially. Why, you could have slipped away after Blackburn's arrest. No one in Clearwater knows about Copper Springs. I'm tired of running, Wade admitted, and there are reasons to stay. A knowing look crossed Cooper's face. Mrs. O'Brien, Wade didn't deny it, Cooper sighed. Here's the situation, Anderson. I have no authority regarding the Copper Springs matter, different jurisdiction. But, he opened a drawer and pulled out a sheet of paper. I can send a telegraph to Sheriff Daniels there, explaining the circumstances and your cooperation in bringing Blackburn to justice. You do that. Daniels is a reasonable man. From what you've told me, no one was hurt in that robbery and you weren't one of the planners. Your testimony could help them catch the real criminals. Cooper dipped a pen in ink and began writing. I'm not promising anything, but it's a start. Relief washed through Wade. It wasn't a guarantee of freedom, but it was more than he'd dared hope for. Thank you. Cooper looked up from his writing. You should know Mrs. O'Brien came to see me early this morning, asked me to give you a chance. Wade felt a surge of emotion at the thought of Willow advocating for him. She did. She's a remarkable woman. Cooper finished the telegraph and set down his pen. Whatever happens with Copper Springs, Anderson, don't waste this second chance. I don't intend to, Wade promised. 3 days later, a response arrived from Sheriff Daniels in Copper Springs. Wade was summoned to the telegraph office, where the operator handed him the transcribed message with a curious glance. Wade read it with his heart in his throat. Deputy Cooper stop appreciate information regarding Wade Anderson. Stop 2 gang members captured confirmed Anderson was misled about job. Stop willing to drop charges in exchange for written testimony. Stop Anderson free to remain in Clearwater under your voucher. Stop Sheriff Daniels end freedom. The word echoed in Wade's mind as he walked back to the Reverend's cottage, the telegraph clutched in his hand. Not just freedom from prosecution, but freedom to choose his path forward. Freedom to stay. Willow was in the garden when he arrived, helping Mrs. Parker with the vegetables. Sunlight caught in her auburn hair, making it glow like embers. She looked up as his shadow fell across the garden bed, her expression questioning when she saw his face. Wade, what is it? Wordlessly, he handed her the telegraph. She read it quickly, her eyes widening, then looked up at him with a smile that outshone the sun. You're free, she said. Wade nodded, finding it suddenly difficult to speak past the lump in his throat. Thanks to you from what Cooper told me, Willow shook her head. I just asked him to listen. You did the rest by choosing to do the right thing. She set aside her gardening tools and stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. So, what will you do now? The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. Wade really looked at her and saw not just the woman he'd found in the ashes of her home, but the person she was becoming, strong, resilient, determined to rebuild from nothing. That depends, he said carefully. On what? On whether there might be a place for me in whatever future you're planning. Willow's breath caught color rising in her cheeks. Wade, I know it's soon, he said quickly. Too soon, maybe. You're still grieving, and we've known each other barely 2 weeks. But these 2 weeks have changed me, Willow, made me want to be someone better than I was. Someone worthy of. She closed the distance between them, placing her fingers gently against his lips. Of what? Wade took her hand in his, lowering it slowly. Of you. Of the chance to build something together. For a long moment, Willow said nothing, her blue eyes searching his face. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady. I loved Thomas, part of me always will. I know that, Wade assured her. I'd never ask you to forget him. But I also believe in second chances, she continued, for both of us. She squeezed his hand. I don't know what the future holds, Wade, but I'd like to find out, together. It wasn't quite a declaration of love, it was too soon for that, but it was a beginning, a promise of possibility. For Wade, who had spent years avoiding attachments and commitments, it was more precious than any treasure. Together, he agreed, and the word felt like coming home. In the week that followed, as they waited for Judge Harmon's arrival, Wade and Willow began the tentative process of building a future. They visited Willow's homestead, where the ruins of the cabin stood as a stark reminder of all she had lost. Despite the painful memories, Willow walked the property with quiet dignity, showing Wade the creek that had made the land so valuable to Blackburn, the orchard that Thomas had planted, the fields they had cultivated together. It's good land, Wade observed as they sat beneath an apple tree, the only spot of shade in the clearing. Rich soil, plenty of water. Thomas always said it was blessed land, Willow said, running her fingers through the grass. Even when the first crops failed, he never lost faith in it. Wade watched her face, trying to gauge her feelings. Do you want to keep it? We could rebuild if that's what you want. Willow shook her head slowly. No, there are too many ghosts here. She looked around the property with a mixture of sadness and resolution. But I don't want Blackburn to have it either, even if he's in prison. What about selling it to someone who would care for it the way Thomas would have wanted? A family looking for a fresh start. Willow considered this, then nodded. I'd like that. The decision made, they rode back to Clearwater in a comfortable silence, the future beginning to take shape between them. When they reached the Reverend's cottage, they found Deputy Cooper waiting with news. Judge Harmon had arrived a day early and wanted to see Willow immediately. The judge, a stern-faced man with shrewd eyes, listened carefully to Willow's account of the attack and Blackburn's subsequent attempt to claim her land. He reviewed the written statements from Wade, Reverend Miller, and Deputy Cooper, as well as the incriminating words Holt had spoken during the confrontation. The evidence is compelling, Judge Harmon concluded. Blackburn and his men will stand trial next month in Prescott. Given what I've heard, I anticipate convictions for all involved. Willow exhaled a shaky breath. Thank you, Your Honor, Mrs. O'Brien. I understand you wish to sell your homestead. The judge consulted a paper before him. Yes, Your Honor, I can't. I don't want to live there anymore. The judge nodded sympathetically. I can expedite the legal process given the circumstances. Do you have a buyer in mind? Willow glanced at Wade, who gave her an encouraging nod. Not yet, but I'd like to find someone who will respect the land, build something worthwhile there. As it happens, the judge said, I know of a young family newly arrived from back east, husband, wife, 2 small children. They've been looking for land with water rights. He looked over his spectacles at Willow. Would you be interested in meeting with them? 2 days later, Willow signed the papers transferring ownership of the O'Brien homestead to Jacob and Mary Turner and their 2 young sons. The price was fair, and the Turners' obvious enthusiasm for the property, their plans for crops, livestock, and expanding the orchard eased any lingering doubts Willow might have had about letting go of Thomas's dream. They'll make it a home again, Wade said as they watched the Turner family load their wagon with supplies for their first night on the property. Yes, they will. Willow leaned slightly against his shoulder. It feels right. With the land sold and justice for Thomas and her father secured, Willow faced a new question. What next? She had enough money from the sale to start fresh anywhere she chose. St. Louis and her aunt remained an option, but as the days passed, she spoke of it less frequently. One evening, as they walked along the creek that ran behind Clearwater, Wade broached the subject directly. Have you decided about St. Louis? Willow was quiet for a moment, watching the water flow over smooth stones. I've been thinking about staying in Clearwater, actually. Wade's heart quickened. Oh, Reverend Miller mentioned that the schoolteacher is leaving at the end of the month, moving to California. She glanced at him. I taught school for 2 years back in Missouri before I married Thomas. You'd be a wonderful teacher, Wade said sincerely. And what about you? Willow asked. Will you stay in Clearwater too? Wade had been considering his options as well. The livery owner had offered him work, impressed by his way with horses. It wasn't exciting work, but it was honest, and it would allow him to put down roots. I'd like to, he said, if I had a good reason to stay. Willow's smile was answer enough. As summer yielded to fall, Clearwater began to feel like home to Wade in a way no place had since his childhood. He took the job at the livery, working hard and earning a reputation for reliability and skill with even the most difficult horses. Willow secured the teaching position and quickly won the hearts of her students and their parents. She moved from the Reverend's cottage to a small house near the school, which came with her position. Their courtship progressed with deliberate care. Wade was mindful of Willow's recent loss and determined not to rush her. For her part, Willow balanced her lingering grief with an emerging happiness that grew stronger each day. They took supper together most evenings, sometimes at the cafe, sometimes at Willow's little house. On Sundays, they attended services at Reverend Miller's church, then often enjoyed picnic lunches by the creek. Slowly, the townsfolk came to see them as a pair, accepting this new development with the pragmatic understanding of frontier life, where second chances and new beginnings were woven into the community's fabric. Word came in late October that Walter Blackburn and his men had been convicted. Blackburn received 20 years in territorial prison, while Holt and the others were sentenced to hang. The news brought Willow a measure of closure, though she took no joy in the harsh sentences. "It won't bring them back," she said when Wade brought her the news. "But at least they can rest easier now." As the first anniversary of their meeting approached, Wade found himself contemplating a question he'd been carrying for months. He'd saved carefully from his wages, and one Friday afternoon he visited the jeweler in the next town over, returning with a simple gold band set with a small sapphire that reminded him of Willow's eyes. He chose a Sunday afternoon for his proposal, suggesting a ride to a spot they'd discovered in the hills above Clearwater, a secluded clearing with a view of the entire valley. The November day was crisp but sunny, perfect for their purpose. As they sat on a blanket, sharing a simple lunch, Wade found himself uncharacteristically nervous. Willow noticed, of course. "You're awfully quiet today," she observed, touching his hand. "Something troubling you?" Wade shook his head. "Not troubling, just thinking about this past year. About how different my life would be if I hadn't found you that day." Willow's expression softened. "I've thought about that too. How unlikely it all was you riding through that canyon at exactly the right moment. When I found you, you said you'd lost everything," Wade recalled. "And I told you that I still had breath," Willow finished, "that it was a start." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "You were right." Wade took her hand, drawing her closer. "Willow, when I said those words, I had no idea what they would come to mean. No idea that finding you would change everything." He reached into his pocket, withdrawing the small velvet box. "I had no idea that I would fall in love with you." Willow's breath caught as he opened the box, revealing the ring. "Wade, I know it's only been a year," he said quickly. "And I know that Thomas will always have a place in your heart, but if you could find room there for me too, for a future together." He took a breath. "Willow O'Brien, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears spilled freely down Willow's cheeks now, but her smile was radiant. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." Wade slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into a tender kiss, a promise of the life they would build together. Their wedding took place on the first day of spring, with Reverend Miller officiating in his small church, now filled to capacity with well-wishers. The Turner family came from their thriving farm, the former O'Brien homestead, bringing apples from Thomas's orchard as a wedding gift. Willow wore a dress of pale blue silk, with forget-me-nots in her hair, a tribute to Thomas and her father, and a recognition that love didn't erase the past but built upon it. Wade, standing at the altar in a new suit, watched his bride walk toward him with wonder. The drifter who had once avoided attachments now embraced this commitment with his whole heart. As they exchanged vows, he thought of that fateful day when he'd found her in the ashes of her former life, how he'd told her that having breath was a start. It had been a start for both of them. A beginning neither could have imagined. 5 years later, Wade Anderson stood on the porch of their home at the edge of Clearwater, watching his wife lead their twin 4-year-old daughters, Emily and Sarah, in a game of chase across the front yard. Their laughter rang out in the clear morning air, a sound that never failed to fill his heart. Inside, their 1-year-old son Thomas named for Willow's first husband in a gesture that honored the past, while embracing their present, napped peacefully in his cradle. Life had blessed them abundantly. A loving marriage, healthy children, and a place in a community that had become their own. Wade had expanded beyond his work at the livery, partnering with the blacksmith to establish a successful horse breeding operation. Willow continued teaching until the twins were born, then devoted herself to their growing family, though she still occasionally substituted at the school when needed. They visited the Turner farm each autumn for the apple harvest, a tradition that connected Willow to her past without pain. The Turners' success on the land that had once been hers brought her genuine joy, Thomas's dream living on through another family's labor and love. As Willow chased the giggling girls back toward the house, her face flushed with exertion and happiness, Wade stepped off the porch to meet them. Emily and Sarah immediately changed course, running to their father with outstretched arms. He scooped them up, one in each arm, their small bodies warm against his chest. "Papa, did you see how fast we ran?" Emily, the more talkative of the two, demanded. "Like lightning," Wade confirmed seriously. "Fastest girls in the territory." Willow joined them, her auburn hair now streaked with a few strands of silver, her blue eyes still bright with the spirit that had first captured his heart. "I think these two could outrun a mountain lion if they had to." "Let's hope they never need to test that theory," Wade said, setting the girls down. They immediately raced off to continue their game. Willow slipped her arm through his as they watched their daughters. "I checked on Thomas, still sleeping like an angel." "Takes after his mother," Wade teased. Willow laughed. "Hardly. I recall someone snoring loud enough to wake the neighbors just last night." Wade pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Happy?" It was a question he still asked occasionally, needing the reassurance even after all these years. Willow understood, always answering without hesitation. "Completely," she said, resting her head against his shoulder. "You know, I've been thinking lately about that day you found me, how close we both came to different paths. If I'd been a few minutes earlier or later." Wade didn't need to finish the thought. "Or if you'd decided to keep riding," Willow added softly. "But you didn't. You stopped. You saw someone who'd lost everything and you offered hope." "You still got breath," Wade quoted his own words from that day. "That's a start." Willow turned in his arms to face him, her expression tender. "It was more than a start, Wade Anderson. It was everything." As their daughter's laughter filled the air and their son slept peacefully inside the home they'd built together, Wade knew she was right. What had begun in tragedy and ashes and grief and loss had transformed into something beautiful beyond imagining. Not because they'd forgotten the past, but because they'd chosen to build from it, breath by breath, day by day, creating a life of love from the simplest of starts.